Hey everybody, welcome back to Drew the Catholic. We have a really special episode today, one I've been looking forward to. We have a guest on who, if you know me, you know that this is my mother, Angela. So we're going to have my mom on the show today and interview her about her conversion to Catholicism and just chat, which we chat all the time. So it's kind of just going to be like recording what we normally do.
We said we should have just recorded all of our conversations and not had to do this.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Not have to get all the fancy lights and all the stuff. But
yes.
Yeah, but it's just like normal. Have a nice cup of tea, and that makes us sound British.
It's hard for me to reach mine without, I'm afraid I'm going to spill it.
That's the only thing about these particular mic stands is they're actually like designed for like a computer setup. Yeah. And I didn't really think about that because then they're in a setup like this, they're in your way. Yeah. So, I don't know. Good. I always find myself like hitting them, and especially when I have a computer here that I'm trying to use like while I'm talking to somebody. Yeah, usually
you do have a computer there.
Yeah, if we're live streaming.
Yeah, live streaming. That's what it is. Okay.
Well, and we're kind of trying some stuff out. Like today we have the table facing that camera because it opens us to the camera more, but normally it's like sideways, but I just feel like you're getting the side of someone's face too much. I don't know. We're figuring it out.
No, it looks good. It's definitely different when you're in this room with everything hooked up.
Yeah, it feels a lot smaller than it does. It feels a lot smaller. Anyone who thinks I have a huge warehouse, don't be fooled. It's pretty cramped in here.
Well, and it seems like the table, when you watch the podcast, it seems like that you're further away from each other. I mean, we're not. No, we're really sitting close.
Yeah, we're like. Yeah. And when we're across like the other way, it's really close. Yeah. Like you're kind of like in the person's face. That was one of the other reasons we tried this out. So I don't know, just always changing. I wish we had like a dedicated space for it, because everyone tells me like, oh, you should have something Catholic in the background. It's like, well, I also use this for work.
Yeah, so, I did ask that because it drives me crazy. I'm like, I know, I need something.
You're not the only one. I've heard that from a lot of people. They're like, you need like icons, and they're like, believe me, I would love to have a bunch of really, really amazing art and stuff, but we don't have. We need like a dedicated space for this podcast.
You do,
yeah. So I'll just win the lottery. We'll buy a big house. And
sound like you sunk your dad. Always the lottery.
I'll just move into his man cave. That's what we'll do. He's not using it. So
yeah, you probably could.
He wouldn't even notice.
He's not using it.
He'd go up there to tie flies like 3 months from now and be like, what happened to all my stuff?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, he wouldn't like that.
I'd get an angry phone call.
He likes to know that room is just at least there for him.
It's the mental knowledge that I could go there and use it, even though
He does go. I mean, when he's missing and I can't find him, but his car's in the garage.
He's usually up there.
He is up there, but it's not very often. But when I really can't find him, I figured out that he's up there tying flies.
Or throwing darts in the wall.
Well, you can hear that. It's
that makes sense.
Tie flying. But anyway, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. Well, so like normal, we have, guests on to talk about their conversions or reversions or just their experiences with Catholicism in general. This one's obviously very different because it's not just like a friend or an acquaintance. This is my own mom. So I know your story really well, but we'll still just kind of walk through it.
Well, then you tell it.
Yeah. That would be more like giving a presentation about my mom.
I know. Well, you might be able to remember things too.
Well, yeah, I'm sure there's gaps that we'll fill in and stuff. And then Gina's running the buttons.
Hi, Gina.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah, so she'll be chirping from the sides there from time to time too, and also running everything. So yeah, I just figure it's always kind of fun to have someone in the background that can kind of chime in.
I actually like that too. I think when I watch your podcast, I think that kind of fills in some space maybe too.
Are you going to watch this episode?
I don't
Probably
know.
Not,
I want to watch it before you air it.
Before I air it?
I may not like it.
Oh, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. People like the uncut.
Well, I know, and I asked you because I'm such a organized type person that I asked you if there was going to be a script and I needed to study and practice because I felt like I would have done better that way.
Yep.
Instead of just trying to remember everything, which is not good when I'm nervous and stuff.
I feel like the conversations end up so much better when you just like don't have a plan. You just kind of see where they end up. You can go all sorts of rabbit holes.
No, I agree. I think if it's scripted, it probably does appear that way.
Oh, yeah, it's really easy to tell. And you can tell, like, in certain interview styles where it's like the classic 60 minutes thing where they can only, maybe for, like, non-disclosure reasons, they can only ask certain questions. Like presidential candidates, it's always this way. You can tell that they had a preset, here's the questions the interviewer was allowed to ask, because it feels very, like, forced in the pacing. Whereas this, I mean, I have no idea what you're going to say, which is what makes it fun for the viewer and for me. Yeah. So,
I don't have any idea what I'm going to say.
Oh, that's...
So you better have good questions.
Yeah. Well, I think the best place to start in any conversion story is kind of with your with your background, which I mean, to varying degrees, I know just from what you've told me growing up and stories I've heard and things that I've heard even in the past, 2 years of you kind of going through this journey. But for everyone watching, just spend a little bit of time telling us about your background, and I'll ask you questions and stuff during that too, but specifically your religious background as well as, some of that.
Well, I think it's hard to remember very young, but I do remember knowing that there was always a God, and somewhere someone taught me, to kneel at my bed at night and do a little prayer, and it was always the "now I lay me down to sleep" prayer.
Yeah, pray the Lord my soul to keep.
Yeah,
and
that's
if I die
one.
before.
And I don't really know who taught me that. I think it may have been my grandmother, but it sounds like something she would have done, but I never did ask, and I just did it. As for going to church, I don't remember that ever being a consistent thing. I think when I was a little girl, my grandmother, when I was at her house, I would go.
And she was Church of Christ.
Church of Christ, and my mother was raised also Church of Christ, but
pretty strict denomination.
From her grandmother, not her mother or father. So it was, I don't know how strict it was. It's just that's what their parents did, and I knew nothing about it. I just remember my mom always saying, "Oh yeah, I'm Church of Christ," and I remember her telling people that, but we never went to a Church of Christ church. I mean, I may have done that with my grandmother. I guess that's where I went.
And when you're saying your grandmother, you're meaning Marguerite, right? Yes. So that's your father's mother.
Yes.
And so then your mother also had a Church of Christ background. So you kind of had it on both sides.
I did, which I thought was interesting. I don't think they met. They didn't meet in the church. I mean, I just think they both had that background. I never had any. I don't think I was brought up that way, or except for the baptism. I did ask my mother about this when I got baptized in the Catholic Church last year. I said, "Why didn't you ever baptize me?" Because I was feeling like, gosh, she just really did me a disservice. Because the more I was learning,
more you're learning about the Catholic view of baptism.
I'm like, what a bad mother.
Yeah.
And she said, and then I looked it up because I was really worried about that, and because my other siblings were all baptized in the Methodist Church with my stepmother,
right?
And because she was Methodist,
she's still Methodist. Yeah.
She's still Methodist, and I did go to the Methodist Church too. So whenever I'd go stay with them on the weekends, I would go to little, church camps and things like that. And my mom would send me to church camp. So I had.
You were around.
I was
church
around
stuff.
church, but it wasn't. I don't know. It wasn't like all the things I'm learning now. I mean, it's totally different, but it was good. I mean, I always knew there was a God, and that's, there was a heaven, and there was just very simple childlike knowledge.
Sure. You didn't have like this understanding of like theology about the crucifixion and the atonement.
Not until you learned to talk.
And from there it was just
and then it was like, oh my goodness.
And,
that was an interesting time for your dad and I think. But anyway, that's a whole nother
have this little
show.
Zealot in your
I know.
in
We're
your
like,
house.
where did this come from? Like,
oh man.
Yeah, that was interesting. But I at the same time we just thought, oh, he'll grow out of this. Kind of not grow out of just theology, but just kind of grow out of being so like wanting people to understand where you were coming from.
28 years later.
We're going to end up talking about Drew more than we are.
Well, that's probably true. It's probably going to. I'm going to come up at least a couple times.
That's what happens
sure,
when you bring your mom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, it sounds like you had and we've talked about this on the show. Like Rick and I were actually talking about this on the episode with that Protestant pastor I had on. That there seems to have been, and maybe the peak of this was during your kind of upbringing. There seems to have been sort of a crisis of catechesis in any denomination in America where people grew up going to church camps. You had, influences on both sides that were going to church, and like Grandma, she still goes to the Methodist Church, and so there's all that influence and all that sort of cultural attachment to it. But coming out of it, you didn't really have like this profound formation in any particular denomination or anything. It was kind of just generally there's a God, Jesus. What was like your understanding of Jesus in all that?
I just thought that he was God's son, and and I just thought they were these people that were up there, father and son. I mean, it was very childlike knowledge, and it stayed that way. I mean, I never did pursue knowing anymore. It's amazing. My mother, I feel like, has a lot of biblical knowledge.
She does, yeah. She surprises me. Like we'll have little conversations here and there, and she like quotes scripture pretty well.
I know, and I don't know really because I don't remember her ever doing that when I was growing up.
Yeah.
So I just think that she has that in there from when she was young and a child and stuff. But she didn't get baptized till she was, I think, in her 30s. I remember being at her baptism. We were going to a non-denominational church then, Bethany Christian, and I think it had sort of a Baptist undertone. Now that I look back, the pastor was, I think, came from a Baptist background.
Every non-denominational church is just a Baptist church that's not in like a Baptist organization usually.
And they were wonderful. It was a wonderful place, and I, like I said, went to a couple church camps when I was in high school and just things like that. But yeah, it's just kind of I never had a place that was like consistent. I had different, so that was fine. That's why I thought it was.
And you probably weren't even aware of like the differences, like going to Bethany Christian versus the Methodist Church in Cortez. Like they would have had profound differences of theology and church, and you might not have been even aware of that stuff, it sounds like.
Looking back, I remember I thought the Methodist Church was sort of boring.
Because it's more liturgical.
Yes, and now I see that.
Yeah.
And now I really respect that kind of for the Methodist Church. And the churches I went to, they weren't, crazy loud or anything, but it was totally different. And I just thought it was much more fun to go to church,
Yeah.
But then, as I got older and married and everything else, we started going to churches where the music was really good and and that kind of would draw you in. But I never felt like I needed to go all the time. I didn't feel like, we need to go. I mean, when we had you guys, like we both felt, we need to get them in church, but we still didn't go all the time.
Right. That was fellowship, right?
Yeah, fellowship.
Because I remember I have weird memories like every once in a while as a kid. I feel like we'd end up there for like a couple weekends in a row, Christmas, Easter, and then maybe it would be like once a month for a bit, and then it would kind of taper off. We wouldn't go for a long time, and Christmas, Easter, and that type of thing.
Easter, yeah.
I do remember like even being in like the kids' care there. I have a few memories of that campus, like really young. Like I probably would have been like 3 or 4.
And I was helping in the child care area, or Sunday school area once in a while.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was just, I just never felt connected to that. Ever.
Yeah, well, and it's so big, and everyone that's on stage is kind of like flashy, and they're like the cool
like,
Christians,
you feel like
and you're just like
you're watching like a concert.
Yeah, which it's designed to feel that way. That's kind of that's how they're.
And then I also felt like you were just going there to hear what is he going to say today that's just going to make me feel better and change my life or make me be a certain way and it was interesting. But you would think that would draw you in every Sunday, something like that.
But you probably only go when you feel like you need something, right? That's kind of, I think, what the approach was. Like, well, I need something to fill me up, so I'll go. But then if you're like, I'm doing good, you don't necessarily feel like you need to go, maybe.
I don't know if we even thought about it. I think we just went sometimes, and sometimes we didn't. It was just it wasn't a priority. It definitely was not a priority. Yeah.
And then, because that's kind of how I've, like when people have asked me like, oh, what was because this is a question in circles, like when someone's asking for your testimony, whether it's, Catholic or just Christian in general, they'll be like, oh, what was your religious upbringing? That was kind of always what I said. It's like, well, we would go sometimes, but it wasn't like a thing we did every Sunday, which that's like common, I feel like, anymore. That's and that's becoming even less so. I would say most people that are kids today are probably having the experience where they like never go and it's like not even a part of their life,
I think I am in a small group right now for Lent that a lot of the women were older and they were reading this book, No Greater Love, and it's about the passion and everything. And they are the same way I am, and they were cradle Catholics. They were given a very watered down version and childlike version, and they didn't know any of the Old Testament comparing to the New Testament and all those things that go together, and
that's what makes it come alive, right? Yeah.
And they're amazed. And when one lady is just, every time she comes in, she's like, "I'm just amazed. I never knew this." And then the other lady is saying this, and they are cradle Catholics, and so it makes me feel a little better, because I did this at such a late time. But I think that was our world then. We didn't have the technology we have now, like YouTube and just the radio channels and stuff. So it's
right. Yeah. And there's so much content out there that's like really breaking those things down. And I mean, honestly, biblical scholarship in the past 30, 40 years in just Christianity in general, and especially Catholicism, has just really, really blossomed in a new way. So it's like kind of the golden age in that sense, which it makes sense that like a golden age of Catholic theology and biblical history would be in the midst of like chaos everywhere else, right? That there's so much competing for our attention that in this time when it's probably the easiest to find it, it's also the hardest because there's so much other stuff going on in the world that's designed to draw you away.
There's stuff that can draw you away. I think, I don't know, I'm starting to think it's purposeful.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of it is technology and just having more access.
So much distraction.
And I think as an adult too, you start to really want answers to questions, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas when you're young or a teenager, you're like, yeah, I know there's a God, and I know I'm going to go to heaven, and I know so-and-so's heaven. You just have this but as you start to get older, you start to really say, I need to know more. And that's sort of, I think, what started with me a little bit. Sure. And it started a while ago, but I think I needed to know more, and now I'm like, now I know too much. I can't even remember anything because I've got too much in there.
No, it's impressive. I mean, I remember, this can kind of maybe transition into the next phase. Well, it's funny because you guys actually ended up sending me to Catholic school, not for religious reasons at all.
No,
but I'm really grateful. It was a really good school. I feel like it formed me in a lot of ways, just in terms of my education and like my character.
Yeah.
But I never became Catholic during that.
I
wanted to a couple times, but I don't know that I did for like all the same reasons I ended up becoming Catholic. It kind of was just like, well, here's what all my friends are doing.
Yeah, you wanted to be able to do what they were doing. You weren't able to.
Yeah, I wanted to try the wine at Mass.
Yeah, I think I kind of we knew that was some of it. And so we just said, well, why don't you wait? You can do it later, and you should.
Many years later, yeah. Which is funny because like looking back on my story, and I think I've said this in my very first video, I could see how someone would maybe look at my story and go like, oh, well, you're just becoming Catholic because it's sentimental because you were a kid at a Catholic school and you enjoyed your experience. But all the reasons that I converted for had almost like nothing to do with the fact that I went to a Catholic school and had a good experience. That helped like kind of ease some of the transition because I was familiar with some aspects
of
it.
Traditional stuff.
Yeah, but all of the stuff I fell in love with about Catholicism has more to do with like my theological formation and honestly a more traditional form of Catholicism than I experienced at Holy Family.
Yeah.
Great school though.
It was
nice, yeah. But then I ended up going to college for theology in a Protestant context, and that's when you had a little zealot in the house.
I did.
What was that phase like? Because, we're still, as a family, aside from me, high school and college, sort of taking a deep dive into Christianity. You and Dad weren't really going to church. We'd had a brief stint at an evangelical church for a couple years, and I think he kind of got burned by that. But
yeah, I think
what was that phase like?
Well, he was going, and then I wasn't going, and because I just felt like it was kind of the same thing we were doing. I'm like, well, we're just not going to stick with this. You're only going because we're kind of in the stressful part of our life. It was 2008, and the recession and all that was happening, and
everyone was going to church.
And I wanted to go for like. Because I wanted to go, and so I didn't go, and then I started going. But I don't know. I think that you were in angst a lot, and because you couldn't understand why not everybody understood what you understood.
Yeah.
Or
was experiencing
what you were, and so you would just have these long like conversations of just being in torture, really. And we were watching you in torture, going, "Snap out of it." You're in high school. You're supposed to have fun. Your dad was a lot more tolerant than I was of it. I would just get frustrated and walk out because you would go on and on and on. And your dad was sitting there for an hour sometimes in your room, and you would just be going.
Well, I think it was
crying.
It was frustrating because I was learning really good things, and I think what the bigger part of it was I was seeing, and reflecting on this many years later when I'm not also like a hormonal mess is a little more clear. I was seeing the effects of like nihilism on all my friends. Like there was no structure of like, here's what the meaning of life is. Here's how to make your way in the world. It was so, and this is probably 100 times worse now, but even in school, like there was nothing guiding people into like how to live a good life or how to be a well-formed human being. And I was just seeing so much pain in all of my classmates and in myself from that. So there was some of that I think was like seeking, like, what is this all about? And school was like, well, it's about going to college and getting a good scholarship. So make sure, you get those grades so that you can get a nice job, so that you can do your hobbies. And then they don't want to talk about what happens after that, which is you die, which, like, what do you do with that, And I mean, me, I'm very philosophically inclined. So I'm having all these deep thoughts and there's no outlet for it. I think YoungLife kind of gave me an outlet for it. And that you can hear more about that in my story. But then you're living on the other side of that, which is...
Well, I'm the one that took you to YoungLife and told you to join YoungLife.
That's true, because I was already feeling all of this with no outlet, and we were kind of going to a non-denominational church.
Yeah.
But I think
you were... Really I forget... That's when you quit football? Or wait.
Because that was a big part of my angst, was like, I just hated the sports culture, like the locker room culture. Yeah, I quit football. I was still wrestling and doing lacrosse. And I wanted to get away from those too, because everyone was like, all they cared about was...
I think I had said, and we said, we went to some orientation and there were all these tables, and I said, Drew, let's look at some other organizations you can get involved with. And I don't know, there was like the outdoor group, and then there was, all the speech and debate, all those things, theater, which I think you would have been great in
theater,
I
could have done that.
All of your impersonations and stuff. But, and then I saw the YoungLife table, and you're like, well, what is this? And I said, well, when I was in YoungLife back in the day, I had to swallow goldfish, and I was telling you all these fun things. And in high school, we would go to YoungLife, and I knew that it had a biblical background, but when you went, it didn't feel like that.
Yeah,
all
it was
your friends
very good
were there,
at feeling just like a party.
But you went all the way
crazy.
to you really took it in, and I think it was one of the best things for you, because you were going through such. And I think some of your friends you were hanging out with were going through those things too. And it was like you were the band of brothers in YoungLife that all were feeling these same things. And so it was good.
Well, I think we were all just experiencing, like I said, like a vacuum of meaning, you know, like there was
that's such a young age to think that, I think.
Right. Well, and now it's getting younger and younger, and like you see the youth depression rates just skyrocketing. So like, I feel like we were on the forefront of that, and now it's really, really bad. There's just such a, there's no guidance for what a meaningful life is in our culture. It's just whatever you want it to be, which really when you're 13, what you would think would be the most freeing thing ever, but it's actually torturous, because you're like, well, how am I supposed to know what I want this to be? I don't even know what I am, who I am, or what I want, and then
or where I'm going.
Yeah, and it's like, well, you can be whatever you want to be. It's like, well, great. Now you've just given me a menu with 10 million options and no value system with which to judge them, So that was, at least internally, I think, some of what's going on. Yeah.
Well, and then we went to, I think you started really getting involved, and you took me to the Harvest Church, I think.
Yeah, that was in college. Yeah, that's fine.
And I felt that was kind of the same. I just felt like they were all the same.
You always liked the music. Whenever I could get you to go, you would like the music.
I would, but I still felt that it was all
It was no
same.
Fleetwood Mac.
It was not Fleetwood Mac.
That can go both ways, depending on...
Yeah, it's not like... I don't know. I just didn't feel, not that you're supposed to feel something, but I just, I loved going. I loved the sermons, and I loved the people, some of the people and things, but I just never felt connected. There was always something missing, and now I know what, but I just thought, well, I just wish I could get consistent with this church thing.
And this is at a time, I was going to say, because I remember you starting to kind of yearn for that a little bit. And I remember seeing that, and here I am studying theology, wanting to be a pastor. And I'm like, oh yeah, my mom's going to
And then I wanted you
to
baptize me.
Yeah.
At one point, at a hard time in my life, I said, I need to get baptized.
Which is funny, because when you first asked me to do that, my theology of baptism was like, why does that matter? Just like put your faith in the Lord. Like you don't need to be baptized.
I think you did say something like that. And I said, no, I want to get baptized.
So she had better baptismal theology than me at one point.
Well, I just wanted to.
Now we're both.
I knew it was important. I didn't really know why. I think I was really starting to ask questions about some of the stuff, like what's the meaning of life, and where am I going, and where are these people that I love? Where have they gone? And then I started like really going, I need to know more. I can't just go to a church on Sunday and like the music and hear a good rah-rah.
Feel good. And
it's not lasting.
Right.
So I think that it did start probably a long time ago. I mean, obviously neither one of us were thinking Catholic Church then, but it started a while back. it just, then we got busy and we moved to Colorado, and then life happened, and I didn't really revisit it, but I always felt like there was something I needed to be doing.
Well, and I remember really seeing that, because for a while you're like, well, I'll go back to school. And for a while you were like, I'm going to be a nurse. I'm going to open a business. You were doing all these things that were good, because I think they were giving you something to like direct yourself towards. But we would talk, because you and I have always done this. We've always, like, if I was visiting from college, or, you know, when you guys moved here, like I would be visiting from work or whatever, we'd always feel like we'd have like some sort of conversation that would get deep.
I know.
Over a glass of wine or something.
Yeah.
And I remember kind of just getting that sense of like, you're searching for something. I think we all kind of were in some senses. I mean, for me, it was like, I know it's Jesus, I know it's God, but there was something similar to your experience in church. I was like, there's something wrong here. And I thought learning more facts about it would just make it to where I could frame it how it's supposed to be in the churches I was in. I didn't realize at the time it was like, oh, I need to be a part of a completely different assembly to begin with.
But you felt like there's something missing, and then that's probably what got you really interested in actual theology. And I didn't quite go that far, but I knew there was something.
Right.
I think it's easy for me to say that now. There was something there was something missing. Otherwise, I'd be going every Sunday. I just wasn't.
Right.
I just didn't feel like I had to.
Wasn't that compelling?
It was. I don't know what it was. I mean, really, like I said, the music was beautiful. It was engaging. I mean, there was really nothing bad about it. I wouldn't have known if they were telling me the wrong thing theological wise or theology wise. It's
funny because in hindsight, at Harvest, actually, looking back, one of the worst sermons I've ever heard in my life in terms of theology, and not just like, oh wow, that was a poorly argued point, but like the theology of itself, I think in its substance is like horrible. They gave while you were there, and it was like the first Sunday you came. It was the one.
You remember it?
I remember it because it was a visiting pastor, and he was talking about how, because they believe that every sin Jesus bore in such a way that God the Father saw him as that type of sinner. So the pastor went on this rampage of like, that God the Father looked at Jesus and said, Jesus, you rapist, you murderer. I mean, he was saying things like that.
He was?
And his theology is that God saw Jesus as if he actually was those things, and that's how the cross works.
Oh.
Yeah, and so like looking back on that, I'm like, that's like the most disgusting sermon I think I've ever heard.
And you knew that then?
I was uncomfortable with it then, but I didn't know why. I didn't have words for it yet. And then now I think, because one of the big problem with that is you can't introduce that change into God the Father and God the Son, because they're the same substance. They're both equally God, and the difference is in their personhood. So if God the Father is looking at the substance of Jesus as though it's sinful and separating himself, you're introducing a separation into the Trinity.
Yeah,
so theologically, it's a big problem. And then biblically, John 3:16 is, for God so loved the world that he sent his only son. Like God and Jesus are on the same page, that this is an offering of love and self-giving, not Jesus loves the world, so he's going to get beat up by the Father who has this vengeance. You know, it's not God so hated the world that he had to beat Jesus to death to get over us and then forget about our sin. It was that he so loved us, he wanted to rescue us from it, right?
Yeah.
But I'll never forget that you were in that sermon, and that was one of the first times going to church, and at the time I was like, this makes me really uncomfortable. I don't know why.
And you didn't tell me that, or maybe you did.
I don't think I brought it up because I didn't want to frame in your mind like this is a dangerous place in terms of theology, because at the time I thought their theology was good. It was just like one sermon that I was like, I don't know why this bothers me. Looking back, that's 100% their theology though. I mean, that's absolutely what they think.
I know. I think that's scary. Like, I don't know if you're just telling people the wrong things. I think it can be dangerous. I know. And now I'm learning that now. But it's easy for me to say that because I'm Catholic now. But I never had any opinion of Catholic. Like now I'm learning about all these people that have these things against Catholic. I'm like, I never had any opinion either way. I didn't know enough
Yours,
about
like, that's a thing that's out there.
I had a very good friend that was Catholic, and I loved her to death. And I, she went to mass, she did, but I had no opinion. And because I didn't know anything about what I know now, so maybe it was best that I didn't have
I think it probably
all those
made it easier.
And have all those things that a lot of people have. I still don't understand it, but I'm also looking through the glasses of being Catholic now.
Yeah, now you're like, what? You guys don't understand what we actually believe, which you can see why on the other end, that's why that's so frustrating as well. But
I mean, I can see now why because you've been trying to plant little seeds for a while, and I think in just a normal Sun way. You know, when I started making those prayer bead things.
Yeah, you were making the Anglican ones first, because I was Anglican at the time, and I was using those, and you liked
and
those,
I kind of found this book, and I started making them, and then you'd say, "Well, Mom, you need to learn how to make a rosary." And this is before you were even Catholic.
I wasn't even Catholic yet, yeah.
And I was sort of going, why would I do that?
Well, part of my thought, too, was if you were going to sell them, there's a bigger market.
You did say that.
And that's just true. Like, Anglican prayer beads are 100% a thing that was made in, like, the 70s to be like, well, Catholics do this, and we're like, we kind of want to be Catholic, but not, so let's have an Anglican version.
We need our own.
Yeah, so it was a very late invention. But the rosary's been around for a long time, and there's a huge market
and beads,
for those.
Just
and
any sort of bead. I kind of looked at. I have it in that book.
Well, and I also kind of knew that, like, I feel like people who make things with beads go one of two ways. They either make rosaries, and like the beads are kind of cool in what they symbolize, but there's no magic. And then there's the people who think the beads are like magic. I know. You know, and it gets really weird.
And I went through a little phase of that too. Not thinking they were magic, but that they had properties of whatever.
Sure.
And now I'm like, oh my goodness. And I just liked making them, and they were easy to make and
the
fun.
bracelets
it was
are really
fun
cool.
to make them, and I still make them. I'm working on the rosary silks. I really would like to do the knotted one.
Oh yeah, and that's
because right now I have one I'm trying to make on wire, like I did the Anglican prayer beads, and I'm just not sure it's going to work as well. I'm still sitting there waiting for me to finish. It's almost done, but.
I need a knotted one so that your dear granddaughter can't break mine anymore.
I know.
Oh, yeah, she's broken a couple.
I look at these knots. I'm like, how do they tie? I mean, I need to like really watch a good video on it.
I'm sure they have some sort of like tool that can help them.
Because they're real tight.
Because I mean, like with our fly tying stuff, we're working with fishing line. We have tools to help tie really tight specific knots, and that cord's obviously not nearly as thin as a fishing line, but it's thin enough.
And I'm sure they use a little glue to keep it.
Yeah.
Anyway, I am.
If you make rosaries, let us know how you accomplish that in the comments.
I will. Because in the
I'm sure there's some.
I have so many beads that I thought,
you do.
Well, I really should make rosaries, even if it's just for friends or family or whatever.
Right.
But I'm still working on how I
can make a Drew the Catholic official rosary for people to buy.
Yeah, I do have some really beautiful beads that are quality and they're pretty. But anyway. You just little things I think about it. I'm like, oh, little things that Drew would say, and then when you moved back to Colorado, you were reading the Faith of Our Fathers. You were coming in.
That's when I was really
little
starting.
Things you started saying, and I may have said to you, oh, Drew, you're probably just, you did go to Catholic school and you're probably interested just because of that. I probably did say that.
No one else has ever said that to me, but you did.
Well, I'm your mom.
I was like, no, Mom, there's no reasons.
I wasn't telling you not to be. I really didn't care. I mean, not that I didn't care, but I didn't have this opinion about that's going to ruin your life. Right. I was like, hey, I really feel like you're knowledgeable. You know what? You're an adult, first of all, now, and you can do what you want. I never had an opinion. I don't think your dad did either. Like, we trusted you completely, and that you knew where you were going to go, and I feel like you sort of had to convince us a little bit, and you really never did.
I was mostly trying to convince myself,
have to, anyway.
I think.
Yeah.
Well, and then what's funny, though, with becoming Catholic, I feel like, and I don't know, maybe we'll find out in person if this is actually how you felt. I felt like me becoming Catholic and talking about it with you guys was less me trying to convince you to become Catholic than when I was in college, becoming a Protestant pastor and like doing all the theology training. There was a part of my conversations with you that was like wanting to convince you guys. I don't know if that came across the same way to you. Of like, come to Harvest or come to this, come back to church, and like I feel like I was less pushy with like trying to shove you guys into church. I was mostly just, and I don't know, maybe it didn't feel different, but I feel like at least in terms of my intentions, like in college, there was definitely like, man, why don't you guys go to church? And like let's explain it in a way that makes you realize that you need to or whatever. Yeah. Whereas becoming Catholic, I was like, that's such a harder sell. I'm not even going to try. I'm just going to tell you why I'm doing it and process with my parents because we talk anyways,
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it didn't come across that way, but hopefully it felt.
No, it didn't. I just felt like you were trying to convince us that it was okay that you did that.
That I was
we were always okay with.
Right.
Because you had by then graduated with a theology degree, and I'm like,
you're like, you would know better.
And like I said, I've never had any thoughts about Catholics and their theology, and because I didn't know it. I didn't know their theology.
Right.
Like, I think if I would have known some of it, because once I started converting and hearing some of it, I'm like, what?
I remember some of those. Well, so let's talk about that. What went from, because I mean, at this phase, You and I would have discussions about this stuff, but it was mostly in the context of like, here's something I'm going through and thinking about, and I'm just processing it with you. There wasn't necessarily you on a journey yet necessarily. And it wasn't like I just kind of tried to hit you over the head with the catechism or anything.
No, and I think I went to the Anglican church with you a couple times.
Yeah.
And then I watched you and Gina kind of go through the conversion together, and her really having questions and seeing some of that. And I remember that. And seeing that struggle you guys had, and then you guys coming to me and telling me you've decided that you're going to go through the class and do that. And I never thought anything about us going.
Right. You're just kind of watching this unfold for us and hearing about it and stuff. But at what point did that change to where you were like, huh?
Well, I think, and I might have it a little backwards, but I think you were like, oh, you should go to Mass with us sometime. I'm like, yeah. And then I think Easter came about, and I always, like you said, I go Christmas and Easter, and I thought, well, I could at least go Easter. I think that was first. I don't know. You'll have to.
I think so.
Yeah. And I think, because I'm pretty sure that is the first Mass. I know that's the
first Mass that you came to, for sure. The Easter Vigil Mass.
Yeah. And we were still wearing a mask. At that point, I think they just kind of opened up the whole church. You weren't having to wait in the cafeteria if it was too full. But
yeah, that was actually one of the first Masses that they weren't doing the distancing in the parish. And our priest at the time had, I think the week before Easter Vigil, had a mask burning party.
Yeah, I remember that.
Which I thought was awesome.
But that was the first, I think I went because it was Easter and you should go on Easter. And that is, I think I always went to church on Easter for some reason.
And that was our first Easter Vigil as well. I had never been to an Easter Vigil before. So I had kind of read about it, but we didn't know what to expect either.
Yeah. I didn't know what to expect. I was
blown away. Why are we starting outside?
And why is it still going almost 3 hours later?
Almost 3 hours later.
Yeah, and that was my first thing, was this went really long. But that wasn't really my first thing, because my first thing was when I walked into the sanctuary and was just like, and it was just, this feeling just came over me like, oh my goodness, this is different.
And that's not even, St. Mary's is pretty, but in terms of like Catholic churches, that's like maybe like 25% of the way to as pretty as they get, right?
Well, I've always loved, I've had some trips I've done, just gone to Europe and seen beautiful old
Right, that's what I'm talking about. Like the really old ones are just insane how pretty they are.
And you're right, St. Mary's is beautiful, but it's nothing like some of these old Catholic. But maybe it wasn't the look or anything, because at first I thought, it was just a feeling when you walked in there, and it was Easter Vigil. But I think,
and the deacon did the Exultet, which is that chant, which is really pretty. We walk in with the candlelight. I always loved that. That's like one of my favorite. That's the reason.
So maybe that was a good first one for me to go to, because I'm very affected by things like that. Like, I think they're beautiful.
I think a lot of people are.
Yeah,
that's a really important reason to like.
It helps
keep
you get
liturgy that way.
Get in the space that you need to be, to pray and to be with God. And that was another thing I can tell you later that a person said, that we can talk about that, the Eucharist and stuff. Anyway, that was it. I went to that, but I didn't know I was going to be Catholic. I just knew I had a really strong emotional feeling.
Which I felt bad though, because we're sitting there and I'm really enjoying the Mass. Like 80%
you're saying,
of me,
Mom, it's usually not this long.
Yeah, the other 20% of me is like self-conscious that your first Mass is like 4 hours.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh no, she's never going to want to come back. Because you did at one point, you're like, are they always this long?
I did say that, because I didn't know. And then I, of course, felt really out of place, because I didn't, all the kneeling and all the prayers, I felt out of place. But I was so enamored with everything going around me that I don't even really being that bothered that, and you don't know all the kneeling, all the prayers, you don't know all this stuff. And I just felt like it was I think now I look back, it was what I was missing from all the other places I'd gone, I think.
What was it? I mean, obviously some of it was the aesthetics and the prayer, and you were saying with the deeper theology, some of it's probably the Eucharist, but in the moment, did you have a sense of what it was, or you just couldn't explain it?
There were some weird things that happened. And Gina, when you guys did your live stream the other day about your conversion, being 2 years?
Yeah.
She mentioned something that I had a feeling of is when you were standing there and everybody was clapping and you were annoyed by that. But she was sort of like, I kind of felt like this community feeling and like these people are all going to be with me in this journey. And
right.
I had that feeling, and I wasn't going to be Catholic. I was just going to Easter, doing my Easter, yearly Easter thing. And I had a feeling these people in here, I can't remember if I had the feeling like I'm going to see them, or they're important. This is important. These people, and I just meant the parishioners in there.
Yeah, you didn't even know any of them.
No, I knew no one. And then I remember having the feeling like I need to get my family in here, meaning your dad, Dylan, and that was my next thought. So those were the things that went through my head, and just I didn't know anything about the Eucharist or anything like that yet at all.
Yeah, right.
I just knew everything that I felt was just from my heart, I think.
Yeah. So then you went to Mass, and I remember, because I love inviting people to Mass when I feel like they're in a place where maybe something about it could speak to them, but I don't really bring an agenda. Like I usually am like, just come, and if they ask questions, like I can explain it to you if you want, or you can just experience it. And then I'm always really nervous to ask about it, because I know for some people it's like that. They're like, it's the best. And then some people are like, that was so boring. I didn't know what was happening. And so I remember being really nervous to ask you.
Really?
Yeah, like how was that?
I said it was long.
I think one of the first things you said is, I think there was a conversation about the length of it, because you were like, it's not always that long, right? I'm like, no. Yeah. And then I think you said something along the lines of like, I think I want to start going to Mass.
Did I? I probably did. Who knows?
And then you started coming. I mean, you started coming.
I did.
Pretty
you guys
much
would pick me
week.
up.
Yeah, we would pick you up.
Because I remember I'd say, you guys don't have to pick me up.
Well, that was kind of our way of making sure you would go.
I know. There was, and then I think in the beginning too,
because you're like, I want to go, and then I'm like, let's pick her up.
Let's pick her up, and she has to go. And I'd be standing out waiting for you guys to swing in and get me, no, so that was fun, and I think that was a good tactic.
It is a good tactic. So if you have a friend that's like, hey, I want to go to Mass with you, say, oh, I'll pick you up, because then they're like, cool,
that's
free
true.
ride, but also then it makes them like, you're not manipulating them. You are doing a good thing, but it kind of makes that more. It puts more skin in the game of like, oh, they're going to pick me up, so now I'm going to be ready to go. And
well, it also leaves you time to talk to them about it after Mass when
important.
You take them home. And I think that was, and I never looked at it as a tactic. I mean, Gina was always like, no.
Well, it wasn't like we weren't like trying to manipulate you. It was just like
we'll come pick you up and we'll go together. We like to go together. Drew would be driving really fast around those corners.
Because we're always running late. New baby.
And that was driving me crazy. She wasn't here yet.
You're right. Okay, we were just always late because we're always late.
That was the thing I can't get the timeline right on, because then I remember Gina, you guys came to dinner.
She was pregnant, though.
She was pregnant, but Gina came in, and I think I'd already been going to Mass. I think I definitely had gone to Easter Vigil Mass, but Gina, you guys had eaten dinner, and you get ready to leave, and you said, we decided whoever out of our friends and family become Catholic first can be her godmother. But then I don't even know if we knew if it was she yet. You guys may remember the timeline of that. It was...
Oh, I remember that conversation, because I think at that point you were already kind of like...
I was going to
You
Mass.
were going, and I think you were considering it, but I don't think you were fully...
Maybe I was. Yeah, I don't know. And that's not why I thought now everyone's going to think that's the only reason. But that I couldn't remember the timeline of that happening. Right. And then I think that did make me think, well, I probably better get on this.
Yeah, if I want to do this.
Yeah, because there's another important thing, and that's being my grandchild's godparent.
Which is
cool. So then you kind of gave me the contact information and of who I needed to contact for RCIA. And I thought, well, I could try it if it's not for me, which like I said, I didn't have any preconceived ideas of what it'd be like. I definitely thought it'd be easier.
That's true.
It was not easy.
Yeah. So talk about, I mean, obviously there's all those practical things of like going to Mass, enjoying it, the beauty. But what was happening in terms of like, because we would have deep philosophical conversations, but we would never, like, you and I would never talk about theology. And then all of a sudden, now you're starting to.
Reading the Bible. I was, you would say things about, you need to really kind of like certain things in the Old Testament and the New Testament and how they line up together, and I'm like, I just never read the Bible. And so you had shown me some videos of Father Mike way a long time ago.
Yeah, that was before I was like the beginning of my thing. I think.
Yeah, and I really liked him, and I thought he was really cool, and they were real quick videos. And then I think you told me about the Bible in the year, because I was reading the Bible at the same time, trying to read it, and I'm so organized, like I have to read it cover to cover, and you sort of gave me a little plan. I think you told me to read I forgot what you told me, but I was doing that, and then I started with the Bible in a Year with Father Mike during this.
And you did the whole thing like when it was coming out, right?
Well,
you started a little behind. Probably.
I was behind. I had to catch up, but then I caught up, and then I did that, and I was just amazed with what I was learning. I'm like, how did I not know this?
I remember that because that was definitely the turning point from like you were coming to Mass with us and like having some conversations. So like all of a sudden, Gina and I are like, man, we have a hard time getting up and praying every morning. And then you're talking to us and you're like, oh yeah, I listen to 3 of the Bible in a Year episodes a day. 1 in the morning when I read the Bible, 1 when I'm running, and then another one when I'm driving around doing errands.
I don't even listen to music anymore. It's bad.
And then you started listening to the Catholic channel a lot, which is just always on at your house.
Yeah. In fact, the other day I decided I was probably overdoing that and I need to like listen to some 70s music.
Yeah.
Because
well, I remember that was it. Because I feel like
I started getting all worried about the world, and not because of that, because I'm learning I learned some things on there that about the Catholic faith that I just did not know, and I was sort of amazed. I'm like, well, how can that be? How does that? And that was.
I remember when you started doing that, because we would start walking in, and all of a sudden,
I was asking you questions.
You would ask questions, and so it wasn't even like Gina and I would start a conversation with you after Mass or anything. Like we would come in, and you'd be like, well, how about you would have all these not you weren't inquisitive like that, but you would, or like accusatory, I guess, but you would have these questions about something you had heard and listened to, and all of a sudden I'm like, she's reading the whole Bible in a year and catching up, like you've caught up at this point. And then you're listening to the Catholic channel and all the time. I mean, like we'd come in just randomly, like let your dogs out or something, and the dog is getting catechized.
I know the dogs are definitely Catholic
dogs.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, and that was really interesting because from my perspective, here I am watching you sort of like catechize yourself and like have conversations, and you were probably hearing our journey, and that was probably having an impact in a way. But I feel like outside of like inviting you to Mass and picking you up, we weren't like it wasn't like we're like, let's have a family Bible study or whatever. No. I'm just like kind of watching your, which is really interesting, right? Because like I have a theology degree, and I definitely was guilty in the past of like trying to like form you in that way.
I also trusted in what you had to say, though, because I knew that you were knowledgeable, and so I trusted in what you had to say, and if I had a question, I knew you could probably answer it. Yeah,
which was it was just weird for me, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. It was because before I would be like trying to get you curious about something that like I learned at Harvest or I learned at school about the Protestant views on things, and you would be like, oh okay, whatever. And like we'd have conversations.
Go clean your room.
Yeah, but then this was totally flipped. Like I wasn't.
Yeah, really. So it was really that noticeable.
Well, that's yeah. I mean, we talked about it a lot. It was like it's funny because when I was Protestant, I would have said just about anything to get you and Dad to come to church.
I know.
And then we become Catholic, and I was very much like, this is like a whole deeper thing. Like we'll just tell them about it, and whatever happens, but we can't be pushy with it. And then all of a sudden now you're like, well, what about this and this and that? And you're asking me all these questions. I'm like, what is happening?
Yeah.
It felt unique and different.
It was exciting. It was like I found something I mean, new, but I never had the feeling like, oh, this is going to wear off, or I'm going to not want to go on Sundays.
Right. That's true.
I never had the feeling of that, though. I just was like, I just can't wait.
Yeah, you discovered something.
Like I discovered something. Like I think I told you once, like not that I've read a lot about the early fathers, but I said this should be taught to children, like in school.
You're like, why don't they teach this in schools? I'm like, yeah, they're going to start teaching.
I didn't even know there
Catholic.
were early church fathers that were directly, had knowledge or knew the apostles, and I just that was outstanding to me, and I didn't even need to get all the books. I did order all the books at that time. I was ordering every book. You were ordering
a book a week. Yeah,
I was ordering so many books, and I still haven't read through a lot of them. But I keep bumping things. Sorry, okay. Gina. Anyway, so I think just that little tidbit of knowing that they existed and they were there at the time was profound to me. That was
because now all of a sudden there's 2,000 years worth of legs behind this thing that you're just discovering for the first time.
To me, that was the best history lesson class that I could have ever had. That just said, well, I am so glad I'm in the right place, and I've felt that ever since. And it hasn't been easy, but I'm also glad that it hasn't been easy, because I tend to like things to be tidy, and let's make it easy and tidy, and let's just not make it too difficult on anyone, including myself. And I think this has not been the case.
Well, there's been a lot of reasons for that. But...
Yeah, there have. But I think that's part of it. And I think that's what I love about the Catholic faith and the church is they stay and you can choose to come. I mean, you choose. And, and I think that's what I've chosen.
Speak to that a little bit, because you've talked about that as like one of the things that's been attractive about the faith to you, especially just in life circumstances, but also just in the world.
I think the world it's really easy to get caught up in all the secular views, and I've even been caught up in some of them, and so I just feel like there were things that I'm like, oh, I'm going to have to adhere to all this, and I don't know, that's going to make this person feel not good, or maybe I'm going to be looked at as, being this way or that way if I am Catholic. And I thought, no, but that's the one thing I do like too, is that they don't change. They don't. I mean, 2,000 years of teaching, and they just don't change anything that's in the Bible, and you can't. Why would you? I mean, it doesn't mean that you have to agree with everything out there. It has to be, I don't know. I don't know if I'm saying it correctly.
You're not going to win any popularity contests because of it, but at the same time, you know what to expect.
You know what to expect, and you know that you're going to go in, and it's all scripture, and it's all, and I really liked knowing that you could go to any church, any Catholic church anywhere in the world, and it was going to be the same liturgy. I loved that. Right. Because that told me there was no fancy business going on. You know what I mean?
Right.
They weren't asking anything of you, and it really wasn't about them. It was about your relationship that you felt with God, I think. Which is
interesting, because I think a lot of people on the outside would say Catholicism is like these dead rituals and you don't have a relationship with Jesus. But what you're saying is your experience is that because of all this rich ritual and this deep history and formation, you get to have that experience in a way. It doesn't. Shia LaBeouf kind of said this. He said it specifically about certain Catholic liturgies, but also about other church services. It feels like they're trying to sell you something.
Yes.
It's like a car salesman.
Mm-hmm.
My dad's a car salesman. That's
no,
funny.
But I totally agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas this is like, you could show up to mass, and for better or worse, there's not going to be like this committee of people like, there's a new person, go get them. Like someone will hopefully come talk to you, and that will happen. But like in Protestant churches I was a part of, there literally was a group of people that were like, okay, if you see anyone you don't recognize, make sure that we go get their contact info, They're like headhunting members.
In fact, I think one of the things I liked about going to Mass was how nobody was interested in everybody else when they were walking in. You walked in and everybody knelt down before even, the Mass started. And everybody was focusing ahead and not talking to their neighbor and not, seeing what outfit Sally had on, or, it was
all focused on Jesus.
It was, but you feel that when you walk in. So you feel like you need to be quiet and reverent, and you just, it happens naturally, I think.
Yeah, that's true. I think the reverence is a huge thing, right? Because like some of the other churches that we had gone to that you had kind of explained your experience with, and that I was really involved in, like in college, the experience was all about emotionalism, in that like the music was really good at making you feel a certain way, and the sermon was sort of like impassioned, and that was all supposed to like make you feel a certain way and like drawn to it that way. Not that liturgy, when it's done really well, doesn't do that. It really does that probably better. But there's sort of this reverence that's present in the way Catholicism presents itself that the other places didn't have. And I want to be careful with how I say this. There's like when you walk into a Catholic sanctuary, you have access to get, closer to Jesus technically than anywhere else. You have access to him, but there's also like a proper way. There's like a formation to it that's like, hey, you don't just run up to him, any way you want. Like he loves you and he knows you, but like also just for your own goodness and your own experience of him, there's like a way to do this to A, get the most out of it, but B, like it's God,
Yeah, humbly. You go in humbly.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And I think that's the biggest part of it, is that there's a humility in approaching
and you
God.
can feel that. I think that's a good way of saying that's what I felt around me. because when I first started going, I would look around like, okay, I want to learn when do I kneel and and I'm still working on all that. But I think everybody was so humble and focused on something that I had never experienced before, and I wanted that.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, that reverence is huge. I mean, I've had other friends speak to this, like if they've come to adoration with me, they're like, this is so different. Because a lot of people are like, well, why do I have to pray to, why do I have to go through a priest, or why do I have to pray to God at adoration, or this and that? So you don't have to, but there's something about it that's different. And, I've had friends come to adoration and be like, that is different than just like praying at home, which is great. We should pray at home. We should do both. But like, there's something
different in there. It's
it's very sacred. It's set apart.
Sacred. Right? It's very sacred, and you get that feeling right when you walk in. And I don't know if everybody has that same feeling. I think everybody has different experiences and how they, some people that doesn't matter to them. I think I'm that kind of person. Like I really need to feel it, and
right.
That was it.
Yeah.
So I think I had said something to you at one point when I decided, and I said, well, if you decide not to be Catholic, then I said, I don't know what to tell you, because do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
I said, this is it. I'm in. I'm way too involved now to.
I was actually really happy when you said that too, because for me, like the last thing I'd ever want is someone to become Catholic because I did.
Yeah.
And that's what that's like my experience of your conversion has been. Obviously, in some ways, you might not have come onto it without me becoming Catholic. Maybe you still would have.
I think just the little nuances you put in and some of the explanations of things that I was really confused on.
Right. But otherwise, like you would have done it without me. Like if I had gotten really close to becoming Catholic and then said, I'm going to go be Orthodox or Anglican, you were already at a point of like, all right, see you later.
Yeah.
You would have still gone.
I felt that especially after getting baptized and going through the RCIA and
tell us about
the catechumen part, all that. I thought, okay, I am
so many classes and
well, the classes were good. I mean, I took an adult class. I think there were 2 or 3 other women in there with me. They were much younger than me. I definitely was the oldest. And then there was a separate class for the younger kids. I don't know what age they start. Is it 12? Or is it?
Well, so
there's different
levels. In that like those kids were being brought into the church.
And they weren't
baptized as babies.
Yeah,
they hadn't
right.
had their first communions.
What it was.
So like at the age of, I think it's like 7 or 8, you're an adult in the eyes of the church. And so they just get brought all the way in.
Yeah.
So they were going to be baptized, confirmed, and communed all at once, even though most kids in our diocese are baptized as babies, communed at 6, and then confirmed at like 15.
That's right. That was the difference. But I think, so I had to go through all that. Like the classes were with adults, but then when we would do things in the church, I'd be up there with all the kids, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm like a kid. The scrutinies, and I was a little embarrassed because I'm kind of an introvert. I don't like to be in front of people.
And here you are for like 2 months.
And I was parading around in front of all these people, and I'm like, I'm in. I said, if I'm doing this, because I never like to speak in public or in front of people, or like this might not go in the air if I watch it and don't like it. But anyway, that was a big growing, like, okay, you're going to start from this spot, and you're going to do everything that, and I did. I had to do all of it. And the baptism was really special, but that made me nervous too. Because we had a parade around, remember?
Yeah, when they're doing the litany of the saints.
And I got myself so worked up
I think that's what it's called.
About that and nervous. But then the actual day, I had to go meet the bishop. But the actual day that I met the bishop and that I got baptized, there was this calmness that came. It had to be the grace of God, really, because I had gotten myself so wrecked before all that. I'm going to have to wear that brown outfit.
Yeah.
And then they're going to baptize me, and I have to hurry and get changed. I was just all the particulars I was worried about. But then when it actually happened, I was just like calm. And I thought, I wish I could always feel this calm.
It was
have
cool.
Anxiety.
Yeah, it was cool to watch from the outside too. Well, so I actually got to be your sponsor.
Yeah,
which
so
is
you were there for all of it.
Which is kind of cool because so like, I mean, it's not every day that I think you got to physically give birth to me and give me life and raise me and all that. But then in this sense, it's kind of not like the roles are reversed, but I got to see you into the church in a really special way, which was a cool experience.
It was very cool. it was very cool for me too, and I had to keep myself together because I thought because of that, I thought, I'm going to just cry the whole time because it's Drew.
It was hard for me not to as well.
And I think you and I did really good.
Yeah.
But because I thought I don't want to be in front of people. I definitely don't want to cry in front of them.
I'm really glad though that you got to go through the full process, because so Regina and I, they had accepted our baptisms, and we kind of, like I said on the live stream, we kind of snuck in through the back door. It felt like we had this random confirmation on a Saturday mass and didn't know anyone yet. And I know some dioceses do it different. Like, so our friend Aaron, when he came in, his baptism was accepted, but he still went through RCIA and was received on Easter, just had confirmation and communion, right? And there's a part of me that's like, that forms you so well in that you've had to go through a lot to get here, that I think by the time that you were baptized, you were well formed, just because of your own formation of like stuff you were looking into, conversations we had, but then also the process itself gave you more than just like material to know. I think it did. You grew a lot, I would say, right?
I think I was forced to, like I said, I think a lot of times, especially as an adult, I tend to I don't like conflict. I don't like difficult situations. I've been in difficult situations. I handle them well. I don't know how. Probably God. Now that I look at things. And, when you were interviewing Father Matthew and he was talking about anxiety and all that, that's exactly how I feel. And so I thought,
and it's funny, actually, when he said that, I thought of you, because neither of you, I think, to most people, come across that way.
I know. That's what people say.
Yeah,
like, really? Because I'm just
you
a
as
mess.
An anxious person.
Yeah, I know. I have heard that. People say, oh, you just appear so confident and so sure. I'm like, oh, you have no idea. So when he said that, and I don't know, I kind of got off track, but what were we talking about?
Oh, just coming into the church, the scrutinies.
Yeah. Oh, just the growing from that.
Yeah,
I think that was good for me. I mean, even though there were times I would get angry about it, just thinking, oh, I shouldn't have to do this.
Yeah.
And it was because I was just being anxious and being like, I don't want to be put in front of that situation. And but I did it. I did it, and that's when I think I started telling you I'm in. I'm not. Once I'm baptized, and plus I was starting to learn a lot. Just and that was another thing. I looked forward to going to RCIA. I mean, I never had ever felt like, oh, I just don't want to do that. I don't want to go.
You were excited about it.
Yeah, I was excited about it.
So now reflecting on that experience, of having, you got all three sacraments at once and boom, 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 boom. What was, going into it, there's all the nerves. There's like, you don't know what to expect. Looking back on, it's been almost a year. It'll be a year this Easter since you were baptized, confirmed, and communed as a Catholic. What's your thoughts on that now? What was it experience like? What do you think about it? What did it do, if anything?
Well, I'm glad it's over.
Now you can just sit in the pew in peace, and no one has to.
I feel like, I still feel like there's a lot I'm still trying to learn. I can't figure out why there's certain things I can't memorize. And I've said them to you, and you're like, well, Mom, just do this. I'm like, oh, but I think now sometimes I'm doing too much. And I started thinking, oh, well, I need to kind of, and now it's Lent, so I'm doing a bunch. But I need to simplify some things so I can start concentrating on, like, I just cannot memorize, like, certain, like the creed and stuff. And I'm like, why can't I memorize this?
Well, and that's hard between, like, most of the time we say the Nicene Creed, and then now we're in Lent, so we're saying the Apostles' Creed. And so they do that little bait and switch. And every Sunday I hear people starting to go into the Nicene Creed and then going, and then they like back up. And
I just think when your brain is young, you attain things. Like the Lord's Prayer I've known since I was little. So that's like, like the ABCs. And, but this other stuff I'm just having trouble memorizing. So that's the only thing I would say.
Because you can just have it.
I know, and I do that, and I feel like, people are probably saying, well, she doesn't know it, but they're not paying attention.
Catholics that have them, and still,
I do too.
Some people just don't memorize things too.
Yeah, I know. I think so. I kind of get hard on myself on that, but I have started going to daily mass just recently, and I've really discovered I really enjoy that because it's totally different than Sunday. I love Sunday too, but I think. There's just something about getting up in the morning and going to daily mass and how it starts your day and how the rest of your day goes after that. And I hope I continue to do that. I like I missed it today, but I'd like to try to get there every day. I just think that with everything going on in the world, that's you need to start your day. And I also had this thought, I thought, well, my goodness, if Father Matthew has to be there every day, then I should try to be there every day.
Someone that ought to
like
be
if
there
it was my son up there,
right,
I would be, like, gosh, he has to do this every day, and I could get out of bed and a little bit earlier and go every day. It's a half hour. So I just started that, and I'm really enjoying that, and I've been pretty consistent about going.
Yeah, I love daily mass.
Yeah, I'm starting to meet some people, get involved with some groups and things like that, which it's good for me too, because I also tend to be a very private person, and I feel like.
So you're doing a public podcast in front of.
I know, and nobody's gonna believe that I have anxiety or anything. But yeah, I think I'm not as anxious, or I'm not as an introvert as I think.
Well, it's kind of a bummer that we're doing this during the day, because I was thinking we'd have like a glass of wine or something.
Oh my gosh! Then I'd start crying.
It's like 2 p.m.
Yeah,
so it's probably better that we.
It's probably better we drank tea, but no, I mean I would love it if your dad would join sometime, but I don't push that ever.
Yeah,
and I've done this on my own from the very beginning, and he has been so supportive, and I'm really lucky to have that for sure, because I do hear stories on the Catholic channel about spouses that aren't Catholic and do not want to be Catholic. And I'm like, gosh, really? Like, I don't have to deal with that.
Yeah.
He's very supportive.
Yeah, like he came for your baptism.
He did.
And all that.
Yeah, absolutely.
He came for Gwenny's, obviously, too, our daughter.
And he walks in and has to be listening to EWTN or the Catholic channel.
Yeah, that's true. You don't think about that.
Although the last few times I came home, because he'll be home while I've gone to Mass with Ivy, our new puppy. And I'll come in and he's got rock music playing, and I change it quickly. But I mean, I love rock music, but I usually listen to the Catholic channel in the morning.
Yeah, all day.
So yeah, that's the only thing I wish he was along with me, I think. And not to be on the negative. I think I'm doing a lot of positive things, and I still don't have that feeling of, I don't want to go today. I have not had that happen one time.
Right. Not
once. I can't think of one time. Which I think is astounding. That especially during golf season, as you would say.
That's true. So this is funny.
Oh yeah, there was a sermon.
Because as a kid, I one time, well, you want to tell the story, because this is like your famous Drew story. I don't really remember saying this, but
did I play golf all the time?
Yeah, apparently one time I confronted her about playing golf too much. I said, Mom, I think you're just playing golf too much.
And I said, Drew, well, how do you know? You're at school. I was still...
Yeah, but you should be at home
waiting
Mom, for me.
You would show up, and I know you played golf because you had your golf hat on still. And I'm like, but...
So what? Yeah.
Well, what am I going to do while you're at school? Just be home, like...
Yeah.
Waiting for you to get out of school?
But then... I was impressed, though, because you guys do golf a lot. And, like, in the summers, especially, it's, like, golf season. And, Gina and I'll be like, you guys want to go for a hike, or do you want to do this? You're like, oh, no, we're golfing. We got a tea time and this and that. We're always like, man, they're always golfing. I always thought, like, man, someone's really going to have to convince my mom about the, Holy Sunday obligation. Otherwise, she's just going to golf. And you never have skipped Mass to golf, as far as I've been aware. I think you might have missed a couple times being sick or whatever, but you've never skipped it for, like, golf.
I think if there was a tournament, because sometimes there is a tournament on Sunday,
you do, like,
I'll do Saturday night.
Right.
Yeah.
Still do that. But so, because I remember I assumed that would be a much bigger hurdle for you than it was, but you never...
Well, and I didn't even really know it was an obligation until a lot later.
Yeah, you're like, oh, I'm supposed to come? I just never thought you wouldn't.
I know, and I just never have felt like it was an obligation.
Yeah, in a bad sense.
In a bad sense.
Like a thing you have to do that's like a pain. Yeah.
I feel like you should feel obligated, And that was one thing I wanted to bring up and kind of change it around a little bit, was when I was first learning about the Catholic faith, and before I knew about the Eucharist or, the real presence and anything like that, a friend of mine who's a neighbor is Catholic and had said, and I forget how I phrased it. We were eating dinner and they were there, and I think I had mentioned that you guys had become Catholic, and she was real excited. I said, and I said, I've been going to Mass, and I said, I have to tell you, the feeling I get in there, and I was trying to explain to her, like, I just never felt that before. And she goes, and I said, I just look forward to going. And she goes, yes. She goes, to be with God. And the way she said it was like he was actually in there, like God was in there. And it's hard to explain. And when she said it, I was like, well, yeah. And then I started to learn more about the real presence and all of that, and that's what she meant, and she said it very matter of fact. You look forward because God's in there.
Because he's there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And obviously God is everywhere, and like Solomon says, like the whole universe can't contain you, but also you're going to be in the temple. In the same way for us, the whole universe can't contain God, but at the same time, he's really uniquely present in the Eucharist.
And it's still hard for me to wrap my head around that, but I felt like, well, maybe that's what I'm feeling. That's what I'm feeling. That's different than anywhere else I have felt, and I need to be here. Like, why am I not here?
I think sometimes I have this awareness of like the reality of that, and like it's like you said, it's a mystery. Like you're never gonna with scientific exactitude like understand that in the same way that you would like maybe understand like weather patterns. But sometimes it becomes so real. Like sometimes I'll walk in and I'll look at the tabernacle, and I almost have this, and I mean this in the traditional sense of the word, this awful experience, like filled with awe, which is also kind of like terrifying because you're like have this awareness of like, that is where God is. Like that's, the craziest, most powerful, large conceptual entity there is like there. And when I don't always have those moments. Usually I'm like, oh yeah, God's there, and I believe that, and it's powerful. But sometimes I walk in and I'm just like, that's the most important spot in this whole town,
And why wouldn't you want to be there? Like
right.
But it's hard. Like you said, the mystery of it, and it's very hard for people to wrap their heads around things like that. But then you can look at something as simple as our mountains right here.
Yeah, and also have an awareness of...
those were created, so how can God just not be right there now? I mean, so you have to look at it that way, but then it's real easy just to say, oh, well, you want a little more proof than this and a little more proof than that. And,
right.
I did start kind of learning a little bit about philosophy, and that was real heady for me. I mean, I loved it, but I was like, oh my, like this is going further than I want to go, and I felt like I just needed to kind of pare down, because you talk a lot about that too, and I'm just like, whew.
That's like the only mode I have.
I know.
Unfortunately or fortunately. Unfortunately for those who have the pain of being in my life, my wife.
I know.
I don't have that, like I don't easily switch off from that. I think I'm just kind of always in that philosophical mindset.
He doesn't have the angst anymore, but he still has a tendency to go on and
on.
And on.
See, Gina, that's what I know exactly what you're...
Why do I invite both of you?
Dangerous game.
Wait a minute. No, it's true. I mean, I would say, I don't have like the existential angst I had in high school, but now I feel like I have way more of a real, almost like zealous, compassionate yearning for everyone else to find what we've found, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Because I will say, like, when I was Protestant, I did have that angst for people that weren't Christian at all. But then I also had this angst for people that were just, like, kind of there, that, like, didn't know stuff deeply. Because I'm like, man, I'm discovering all this stuff, and it's so important, and it changes how we view everything, and no one cares. Now I'm like, man, we're all on the same team. And I feel like more Catholics have this, like, depth than I was experiencing, and that's anecdotal, but now it's like there's this compassion and there's yearning the same way that it was in high school, but now there's something I can rest in, if that makes sense, for my own self, and invite people into.
I think it makes you just a better person. I mean,
that too.
When you start learning about Catholic teaching, I think just the whole selfless thing, it's so easy to get caught up in all these things that aren't virtuous. And you start realizing, well, even that little thing I did was prideful, or learning all those little things. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like this just changes. It makes you a better human being. And it makes you see all people in a different light.
Right.
As, it just makes you see life differently. Which I think creates joy eventually. I mean, it has something. I agree that everybody should have.
Yeah. There's a reason it's called the Catholic faith. It's the universal path for everybody. There is a universal path, not meaning that everyone can go their own individual, unique way, but there is a universally common way to God, and that's the faith. This is the way. There is no other way.
It doesn't change, and it's not going to change.
Yeah.
And even though the world around us is changing everywhere, and I do.
Kind of looking into some of that stuff, like what would you say? Because I mean, to be Catholic in today's society, there's a lot of things that you have to come on board with some of those moral views and stuff. And some of those were different for you, things that maybe you didn't believe before. Can you kind of speak to that shift in those specific things? You know, like there's a lot of teachings on like sexuality, about, you know, the indissolubility of marriage, about other religions and things like that. Like what was your, you know, experience with some of those shifts?
Well, I think, you know, I started to learn about the sacrament of marriage and a little bit more about that I felt I started to understand more. And then obviously the pro-life stance.
Yeah, that's another big one. Yeah,
that was a big one for me. I was always pro-life, but I didn't walk around and think about it or talk about it. And there was I know there was a time, and I probably said it to you, that I said, well, I don't really believe in abortion. I said, but I kind of feel like women should be able to make a choice. I remember saying that.
Yeah.
And then I think some of the things like that, and there's just a bunch. But I think it maybe just I'm trying to think how I could say this. It made my conscience wake up a little bit. Like, I always knew that I felt that way about abortion. So why was I going around saying this or saying that? Well, because I was hearing all this other stuff or watching these certain channels, or, you know, thinking, well, I need to be that way because I'm a woman. Or I need to do this because this group over here is doing it. Or I need to, you know, do this. And like, I used to have a Buddha hanging around just because I made those beaded bracelets. I didn't really believe, like, I didn't worship Buddha or anything.
When Gina and I were dating, you had a little Buddha statue outside, and we'd be like hanging out on the porch.
You guys would put him face down, and I would laugh. I would go back out the next day and put him face back up, and you guys would go back out there and put him face down.
Because we're like having these conversations, like discerning our marriage to each other, and I'm like, I don't want Buddha involved in this.
She's probably thinking, your mom's crazy. Buddha finally ended up in the trash can. I think. But anyway. But nothing against Buddha, but I think I was telling your dad this other night. We had a conversation, and I said the Catholic Church has made me listen to my soul. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like you've always, and the Bible even says this very clearly. Everyone has the law within them, like they have a conscience given to them.
I do believe that now,
and it's been so dampened by sin, our own sin, original sin,
absolutely.
and just the world. Yeah,
I totally agree with that, and I think when I hear things about conscience and soul and things like that, I'm like, that's what it is. That's you know, there's something inside of you that is inherently good. I mean, God created you to be good. And that's there speaking to you, saying,
yeah. And if you choose to ignore it or
it's like
go
against
it,
it's like a little mark on your soul. I think it is, and I think definitely conscience and soul is a big part of this. I feel like I'm listening to that and hearing that. I don't always follow it, but it's much bigger than it was for sure before. And
that's kind of the whole goal of the sacraments, right? Is that we're made in the image and likeness of God, and that by participating in his life, that part that he's created to be who we are, that part is supposed to be completely in alignment with God and his conscience, right? His view on things. And then it is one of those things where your conscience directs you, and you can lean on it, knowing that it's been well formed by the church's teaching and by God's own inner life and the sacraments, right? Whereas like a lot of people will say like, oh, follow your heart, follow your conscience. And really what they mean is like, gut. Do what you want. And follow your gut, your instinct, which there is a part of us that has like these debased desires and instincts. And that's not really what you're talking about. You're talking about that like moral instinct that we have, but a lot of us have turned off or deafened ourselves to.
Yeah. Or just feel like, oh, well, we don't want to be thought of as a certain way if we aren't. I'm talking about the pro-life issue mainly because I grew up in the 80s or 70s and 80s where all that kind of started, and so I kind of grew up thinking, well, this is how I have to be. But I could have easily been, you know, if it would have been legal in 1966, you know, I could have been an aborted baby. And so I always looked at abortion that way, because I always knew that that could have been me, but it was illegal, so that's why. But my she was Church of Christ. She would never. She would never have done that. Yeah. She would have never done that. She was a teenage mom. Mm-hmm. But it could have been, if it was today's time.
Mm-hmm. Could have been different.
And I think about that, and I just it's awful.
Yeah.
But
well, I think there's a lot of things like that too. I think one of the big things for me was, it's not that the church is just outdated and has all these stuffy old uninformed views that they're unwilling to move on. There are some really good reasons they hold so tightly to everything they do.
Yeah.
That was one of the big things I realized, like with marriage, right? Like the indissolubility of marriage. It's not just like, oh, Jesus says this, it is that, but it's also like, look at the havoc that's been wreaked on our society by things like no-fault divorce, and just the prevalence with which, and the frivolousness with which people enter into marriage. I mean, 50% end in divorce and all of that. And it's not just like, oh, if you do that, you're going to hell. It's more like, these things are safeguards so that we can thrive as human beings. Yeah. And they have not just temporal, but also eternal consequences. So the church is like, this is a matter of your individual thriving, but also everyone around you.
Yeah.
I think when I started to realize that, I was like, okay, that's why the church is so dug in on abortion and on the indissolubility of marriage, and even on, marriage being between a man and a woman. And none of those are popular things to say.
They're not. It's not popular to be Catholic, I don't think, now. And I may be noticing that more now that I am Catholic. But I still feel like that I still have this conscience that was put there, and I need to listen to that.
And it's been clarified, and
yeah.
I remember one of the conversations we have, and you're probably like, oh gosh, you are going to bring this up. Because this is when, I think you had never had a problem with me becoming Catholic or looking into it, but there was a question you had about like their view on homosexuality. And I remember we were at dinner and you said, well, I like all the, like it's beautiful and the history and all that, but like, what is your, what's your take on their view on homosexuality? And I remember this conversation very clearly, because I had at that point not really had the opportunity to talk with someone about that. And I just explained like, well, let's just look at it from a natural perspective, right? Like just biologically speaking, not even getting theological for a moment, our reproductive organs have a very clear end goal. And like, regardless of what sex does or doesn't do or feels like in the moment, the biological purpose of them is for creating children. And the reason people get married is for that. And so anything that's different than that end goal would be, by definition, using the true form of the word, a perversion, right? It would be, if this is what this is for and you're doing this, it's falling short of the original goal. And I remember you were like, I've never thought about it. Do you remember that conversation? Like, I've never thought about it that way, of like, if the purpose of sex is just purely in a biological sense, children, not to mention in a moral and teleological sense, getting philosophical, but I think anyone can look at it. Well, maybe not anymore, but most reasonable people, just from a biological, natural law perspective, can go, oh, that makes a lot more sense. Like, if I start putting water in my car where gasoline's supposed to go, things are going to go wrong. So if we take natural parts of our own humanity and start using them in improper or ways they're not designed to, of course things are,
and that's not popular. It's not
it's not popular.
But it's not, I think it gets skewed as being bigotry or anything like, and it's not that at all.
Yeah.
It's just the teaching of the Catholic Church, and it's a biological thing, and it's a sacrament of marriage, and it has nothing to do with the person or the
right.
So
it's
once
not like
I know, and I didn't want to be viewed as, oh, because you're Catholic, this is how you're going to feel about me, and I thought, oh, I'm worried about that. I was worried about that, and I still worry about that because I have close friends and family that, that, but I think they know me well enough to know that my heart,
like.
Yeah, because I worried about it. I thought before I jump all the way in, I'm kind of worried about this thing I'm worried about. I don't want people to think I ever don't love them, or I'm judging them, or I'm not there for them, just because I'm Catholic. And I still struggle with, if I'm ever asked that, which I haven't been, but then there's other things that I was talking to someone that was in a group here that does things for women. And I said to her, young women, like counseling and outreach, or I forget what it was, what the group is. And I said to her, I would love to help with that. I said, except for one thing, and this is before I ever was baptized. I remember except for one thing, I am Catholic, and so I will not. There will be no abortion. There will be no something about abortion.
Yeah, like I won't be a part of anything.
I will not be a part of anything that supports abortion. And I couldn't believe it came out of my mouth. I went, I remember that. I just said that, and her face. She was very kind because she has a kind, like she just accepts everything heart, which is awesome. I do too, but she was just very okay. Well, so needless to say, she never asked me to join her group, but
right, because that was indeed
because I think and we can't get into like all the specifics of that, but I think it just came out of my mouth and I went, oh wow, I just can't believe I said that.
I remember you telling me that, and I could just because I know what you're talking about, so I could visualize it in my mind, and I'm just like, oh.
I did. I said it. Just
but that's
right
good. I mean, I think that's.
I couldn't believe that's so not like me.
Thing, though, like loving someone should never mean not being truthful.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? In fact, loving someone should be telling the truth, and there's the gentleness that's proper to it, right? Because it wasn't like you like yelled at her, but you also weren't like a pushover of like, well, I believe this, but I'm gonna pretend like I don't, because that's loving. No. It's like, here's what I think the truth is, or here's what the truth, just objectively is. If you can have the the boldness and the proof behind you to say something with that boldness, it's like not actually beneficial for someone to be coddled in lies.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and like, I mean, you studied addiction for a while. Mm-hmm. You know that when it comes to addiction, you can't do that. Like if someone's addicted to drugs, you can't be like, they're just living their truth. You're like, well, their truth is going to kill them.
Right.
So we have to tell them what you're doing is destroying you at some point. And you don't do that by like beating them with it.
No.
But it's good for people to be challenged. And I think we live in a world where like to challenge anybody's view is to attack them.
Mm-hmm.
But that's such a dangerous thing to have someone's view be attached to their core identity in so many ways, because then we just can't have conversations, right? Like if your identity and views are unassailable and they're different than mine, we just can't even be in communion with each other.
Yeah.
We can't even talk. So I think that's an important thing to like be able to say, hey, I'm all about these things that you're doing. I'm not on board with that because I think it's problematic for these reasons. I want you to succeed in these good and beautiful things and thrive. Mm-hmm. This might inhibit you from that, and if you can't tell somebody that, how would anyone ever wake up to a problem in their life? How would an addict
that's hard to do
change?
Because I think that people would tend to think that you were being holier than thou. Or,
yeah.
And it's a hard balance. Oh, I hear Gwendolyn.
We're probably getting close to a good endpoint anyways, but yeah.
I know. Did we even get to anything that you wanted to talk about?
No, I think so. I mean, we kind of got through most of your journey.
Yeah.
Reflected on some of the challenges and stuff. I don't know. I guess, yeah.
What do you think, Gina? Do you have anything to input? Poor Gwenny is up there crying.
We'll go get her in a second.
Okay.
I was going to ask you, a lot of times you'll make jokes about like, oh, well, I didn't come into the church until I was old, or, like you're this weird outlier. But there have to be other people like you out there who are maybe like at some point in this journey, or maybe they've come across the possibility of Catholicism, but they're like, well, like my life, the bulk of my life is already done. Like, what's the point? I should just carry on the way I have been. What was it that you feel like, gave you the strength to look into it? Or like, what would you say to that person?
I think everyone's different. I think it's kind of touches on what I said earlier about when you get older, you start kind of wondering about, okay, what's next? And I'm seeing loved ones die and I'm seeing tragedies happen. And I just need to know, where are they? Mm-hmm. And that was my personal experience. But people my age may all have different experiences. It could be anything. But I would say, don't be afraid. I mean, go to Mass. I would just do what Drew said. Just go to Mass.
Have someone pick you up. Yeah.
Have someone pick you up and go to Mass and learn. I would learn about it. I think, there's some people my age that are in this class that are closet Catholics, but they're doing a lot of Bible in the Year with Mike Schmitz. I would really recommend that for sure. because I think there's a lot of people my age that really don't know a lot about their own Catholic faith or even the Bible in general. I mean, even if they're not Catholic, listen to Bible in the Year.
Do you think coming into it, I don't want to call you old because I don't think of you as old, even though you call yourself old all the time.
I know, well,
but like, do you think that has given you, like, what perspective do you think that you have? You know, you've lived your whole life as not a Catholic, and then kind of looking towards the latter half of your life. Now you are Catholic. Does that change your perspective on your life up till this moment, or what? How has that affected you?
Oh no, it's changed my perspective in a lot of ways. You know, I'm not afraid of. I shouldn't say I'm not afraid of anything, but I'm definitely not afraid of death. I'm not afraid of where we're going, where we're at, what we're all. And those were the questions I wanted answered. And I could have easily said, "Oh, I'm just going to get those answered and then be on my way."
Right.
And it was just something. You know, I can't put my finger on it. For me, it was just where I am supposed to be. It was that feeling of this is where I'm supposed to be. And I don't want to use that word home because I hear that all the time. People say, "Welcome home."
Oh, yeah,
But I did feel that way, and I didn't know any of the people in there, and I didn't. But I felt like I wanted more of that. I needed to be a part of that, and to know what I needed to know, I needed to go through all of that. Go through to do this, and so.
Do you feel as though like that's something that you had kind of all like? And I don't know. I don't want to like feed your answer, but you feel like you're home now, and you have this sense of belonging. Is that something that you were missing before?
Yes,
so it's almost like this. Wow.
Yeah, because like I said, going to all the churches before I did. Oh yeah, I need to go Easter, Christmas once in a while. This I'm like, no, I need to be there. That's like now I'm going to daily mass, and I'm like, if I don't make it, I'm upset. I'm not upset about it, but I'm like, oh, I really miss that today. And so yeah, I wouldn't say you're ever too old.
Right.
Ever, ever, ever. I mean, I was standing up with 12-year-olds parading around the church in my little brown dress. Really, and it was kind of funny, but I thought, well, I sort of am a 12-year-old. I mean, I'm getting baptized, or I'm a newborn, basically. And I started to look at it that way, and that changed it all. And I'm like, you know.
I think it's cool to talk to you about it, too, because so much of your perspective is, like, finding the resolution of, like, how it puts all the pieces of your life together, finding that place of belonging, finding security and comfort in death, you know, because like we're all going to have to die. So that's the one thing we all have in common.
That's right.
You know,
that's right.
I've been thinking about this. I think about death a lot, guys. That sounds so morbid when I say it.
I do too, but only, you know, by default.
No, I mean, I think about death probably multiple times a day now. And so I was thinking about this in the gym. John and I were at the gym a couple days ago. And I've really been reflecting on this just lately because, you know, there's been some loss in our family, and then just in my spheres in general. There's been a lot of loss in the past couple of years. And I just had this moment in the gym because I'm always reflecting, like, I'm going to die someday. Like, Memento Mori, how am I living my life in a way that I'm going to die well? But then I had this realization that, like, everyone that I interact with, whether it's clients or just people on the street, people in church, people that I'm like having to, you know, work into a set with at the gym, that I'm like, man, it'd be better if you just weren't here so I don't have to work you into the set. We all have to die someday.
Yeah, we do.
Like, we all are going to have to face our own death. And so it's made me a lot more gentle to people when I remember that, because you're like, we are all just kind of like getting through life, and most people, not being Catholic, not having Jesus, are just kind of like anxiously putting off the inevitable greatest challenge that we all have to go through, and that's dying.
Yes. Yeah.
I was thinking about this with some clients the other day, because I'm like, it's so easy, like when you work with people, like, man, you're being difficult, just sign the contract or just do this thing and make my life easier. And then I'm like, that's a person who, most of them closer than I am, you know, is going to have to face their death someday. I don't have to make their life harder now, because they're going to have to get there and deal with that. I feel like I'm ready to die. Not that I like want to die now, but like I feel like being Catholic in a way that never before has been true. If I died today, I can have peace with that. But like knowing that most people, we all have that in common. We have to die.
Yeah.
And most people are just like, I don't want to talk about that.
Don't even
want to think about that. You know?
But I think that when you have some deaths happen close to you, you want an answer. You want answers to some questions.
Totally.
And not that I have all the answers, but it has given me this peace and this feeling of the same. I have the same feeling you have now, is because I used to have panic attacks, and a lot of my anxiety would come from dying and getting in an accident and things like that. Because there was some of that in my family that happened. And so I was kind of grew up with that, maybe that anxiety around me, not knowing it. And I was always afraid of death. And then death started happening to people I really loved. And I was just couldn't believe that I was not going to see them again. What if I don't? What if I don't see this person again? And it just was this angst in me. And so I think that was the start of all this. And then now I feel totally at peace with all of that. I really do.
That's good.
I do. Yeah.
Cool.
Oh, she's not.
She's really getting.
She is not playing.
Now. Normally she'll wake up and she'll be like, "I'm chilling for a little bit." She likes to have her like meditative time. But,
yeah. She's
well,
like,
I
am.
Yeah. Any other last thoughts about?
No, I'm glad it's over.
You're glad to be Catholic.
No, I'm glad this is almost over.
It's really all the podcast. I was gonna say it's just the beginning of being Catholic, Mom. It's not over.
No, I know it's not. No, I'm just beginning for sure. So.
Well, thanks for coming on and sharing your story.
Thanks.
It's cool. It's been much cooler to live through it and see. Like it's a cool perspective from my end. Like seeing you and knowing you obviously so well as my mother, and like having grown up with you as my mother, but then now to like have seen you go through this, and
it is kind of a nice reversal.
Changed you so much. If
has
that makes sense. I feel like it has, and I don't mean that to say that like you were really crappy before and you're like that's not what I'm trying to say. But it's I've seen the peace you were talking about. I feel like I've seen that in you in a more palpable, like in a really palpable way, which is cool.
Yeah. I think it's a neat reversal of things. It's not like the mom trying to get the son to go to church. Yeah. You know, it's such a weird little fun story, but I think it's ours, and I think it's cool, and I think that it'd be great if we were all in there.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thanks everyone for watching this episode. Let us know what you think in the comments. If you sort of related to anything we said. If you think there's someone else who would like this episode, be sure to share it with your friends. Let us know what other ideas you have. Who else should we talk to? What else should we talk about? And we'll see you next time. Oh, subscribe if you haven't. Most of you, like 70% of you that watch these, like aren't subscribed. So
subscribe.
Hit that subscribe button, the notification bell, and we'll see you next time on Drew the Catholic.
Bye.
Thanks.
Did I answer your question, Gina? I feel like I would start to answer a question. I would go down a rabbit hole.
That's what makes it great.